Hey everybody, this is Dan,
And this is Ron.
and this is a nominee questionable movies. And welcome. Uh, Today we have just in time for Christmas, a classic Christmas movie. Although it's it's a lot less heavy on the Christmas, I think, than a lot of other Christmas movies, and we're going to get into that in the course of the next 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah, the
And
Christmas in this movie is sort of a secondary thing. And also the just in time for Christmas is we're recording this just after Christmas. And this will
and
go live well after Christmas.
yeah, this might be our Valentine's Day episode, which it could work for that too. It's a movie that checks a lot of boxes, and of course, I say of course. There's so many. We're talking about the shop around the corner, 1940. Ernst Lubitsch, Margaret Sullivan, Jimmy Stewart, classic movie.
Yeah.
Um,
Wonderful
and
movie.
yeah, like probably the least questionable selection we've covered on this show to
Yeah,
date that
yeah.
I can think of.
By the way, I thought of some other things I was looking at. I forget why. Have you ever seen Flash Gordon?
The 80s one?
Yeah.
Yeah, like long time ago. I had a friend who was like uh, really into that.
Okay.
When they were kind of figuring out their which of the eight genders they were, and it was just I got a lot of fervent text messages saying like, "Did you see? There's a new version of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera, and you need to watch the 1980s Flash Gordon." And I only saw one of those. I
Okay.
think I might have said that I saw both just to get out of seeing Phantom of the Opera because I did not want to see that. But I don't know. Maybe it was good. Maybe it just didn't look like my thing. But um,
You made the right decision and it's not your thing.
yeah, Flash Gordon though, I was into it.
Okay.
It
Okay.
had like the Apple Xanadu vibes, It's like totally over the top, cheesy, ridiculous. Um it's
Th-
just
That's
very
that's
80s. Yeah.
That's why I was trying to think of something sort of in that vein that you haven't seen, but you've seen and introduce you to it, but you've seen it, so I
Well,
mean we can still
I
talk
saw it
about it.
so long ago. I mean,
Yeah.
I saw that probably like 15 years ago.
So maybe it's time to rewatch it. Who knows?
Yeah, we could do that.
But I took us off track. Shop around a corner.
Shop around the corner. So 1940, Ernst Lubitsch was certainly the best comedy director of the 1930s and 40s, possibly the best comedy director who ever worked in the United States. You could like in terms of like people who just directed who weren't like actor directors. I wouldn't compare him directly to say like a Charlie Chaplin or a Buster Keaton or someone like that. But in terms of people where they're taking a script and they're wringing all the humor and whatnot out of it that they can, I
Mhm.
can't think of. I mean, Preston Sturges was very good, and unlike Lubitsch, he did write his own scripts. Although, granted, Sturgis had the advantage of English being his first language.
Mm.
There's arguments that can be made for Billy Wilder. I just think there's something about Lubitsch, and this is spoken about quite a bit in the critical and otherwise literature on Lubitsch. Usually they call it the Lubitsch touch. Um, yeah, there's just something like it. He's not very showy in how he directs things, but he just somehow manages to get perfect performances, timing, and just sort of unobtrusive framing to let everything happen.
It's funny you mentioned the Lubitsch touch. I mentioned I mentioned
The match touch.
I meant the match
We're,
touch.
we're, we're going to be getting the match touch again soon, where we're going to be talking about It's Your Move, but
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, I hope so.
that's like our advertising bumper
Right, right.
right there.
But yeah, I was talking to Matt, right, just after watching it, and he asked me, so did I think it had the Lubitsch touch? And it's like, I don't know what that is, but I think so. So, what is the Lubitsch touch?
The Lubitsch
On
touch,
that?
it's hard to quantify, I guess, would be basically he has the humor in his films. It's not broad, it's very subtle. Um, it never seems like it's covering for a deficit of something else in the film.
Mm,
Like I think shop around the corner, you have very well developed characters,
hmm.
very well structured narrative. There's not really a character in the film that seems he's more interested in some characters than other characters, but none of them seem like they're there just for the sake of making jokes. Um,
Right, even though there's multiple people in the shop around the corner, we've got the main people, the couple, or not the
hmm,
couple, but the two.
the will they, won't they?
Yeah, the will they, won't they, and then there's a little bit more of the shop owner, and then there's other people who work there. But even the people that work there, they don't seem extraneous in that they're just there for the joke.
Right, and they each get their own time. They're not kind of like I feel like a lot of movies that followed this, and we were gonna watch You've Got Mail for this episode actually, and Ron started it and he was like, "This is so bad, I can't finish it." And I think part of what makes You've Got Mail and a lot of the imitation movies that came after this not have that same touch is the fact that they're so laser focused on the couple. Whereas Shop Around the Corner, you could the famous thing is obviously the Jimmy Stewart Margaret Sullivan letter writing relationship. They don't realize that they're the people who've been writing the letters to each other. They squabble a lot. That features some romantic comedy tropes. That's kind of like, it happened one night where Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert are squabbling for most of the movie, and then they realize they're in love with each other. But you could also say that this is a movie about a small business owner having a midlife crisis. You could say there's a lot of other things in this movie, and I think it's Lubitsch is speaking from a personal place here, which is not usually the case with like it's very hard to make a romantic comedy personal because so much of it is centered around unrealistic fantasies about courtship.
Right, which is definitely not. And you've got well-developed A story and all that, but you've
Mm.
got with the two main characters, but you've also got a very well-developed B story. That's the shop owner with the different character and the shop owner having the midlife crisis.
Right, and the shop owner, like it gets really dark. He finds out his wife is having an affair. He's being a dick to his employees, and they can't figure out why. And then he almost kills himself, and he's in the hospital. And I think this is another example of the Lubitsch touch. He knows because none of that seems like distasteful. None of it seems maudlin. None of it seems like he's self-conscious about the fact that this is supposed to be the moment of dramatic pathos in the film that kind of balances out the comedy. He just seems to be responding very genuinely to the tragedy of the store owner and his wife, who we never see.
So speaking of all this, do you want to talk about the plot of the movie? Do you want? Can you?
Oh yeah, yeah, okay. So yeah, we should probably talk about the that's
Eventually at some
that's
point.
our trademark, right? Is we give it to you in disordered chunks. Um, but yeah, so we're in Budapest. It's sometime presumably in the early 1930s or late 1920s. I would guess that because it's Budapest, Lubitsch was probably thinking about his own time in Europe, probably in the late 1920s, because there's no real reference to Hitler, the war, or anything like that. Um,
There wasn't. You're right. I keep imagining that there was, but I can't
I
think
mean,
of it.
there's
You're
there's
right.
indirect references because you can kind of see. Oh God, what's his Kralik? Well, okay, I'll get into that a little bit later because that's like that's a really interesting to me at least uh, portion of the film. Anyway, so you have a knickknack store, right? I guess like a department store. You have a smaller end department store before all the department stores were consolidated, called Matichek and Company. You have Jimmy Stewart, who is Mr. Matichek, the owner's long-standing employee. and kind of at one point they say that he's sort of like a surrogate son to him.
Right.
uh, you have all the other people who work at the store. At one point, the owner mentions that he's employing more people than he probably should be at the store, but you also get the sense that they're kind of like a close knit. It's one of the more believable, like, people in a job come to share something superficially resembling like a family relationship.
They all show up. It's interesting, even from the beginning. They all show up early. I mean, it's a small store. It's the
Hmm.
shop around the corner.
Right.
It's a department store, but it's not this giant thing. It's small, intimate.
Hmm.
But when all the employees show up before the owner actually before he arrives and opens the door to let them in, and they're all having these conversations, and that happens at least twice. But that's sort of, I don't know, it gives that sense of family that you're describing, I think.
Yeah, and they all kind of relate to each other in a way that, um,
Family squabbles.
yeah, they have family squabbles. I think that's what makes it believable, is that it's not like 1 second the people hate each other and they're like pulling pranks on each other, and then they're getting all teary eyed at like somebody's wedding. Like, that was my least favorite part of the U.S. remake of The Office, was how they forced, like, any sequence where anybody's at a wedding on that show is cringeworthy, poorly conceived, poorly done. The actors are in a bad place, the writers are in a bad place, etc. But in this, we have something a little bit closer to, not like bitterly remembered family dynamics, but it's just something where the people, the relationships between the people seem fairly organic.
Yeah.
And so Jimmy Stewart, aka Kralik, he's working at the store. This young woman comes in, or no. First, he's talking with his old friend who, shit, I should have looked up his name before we recorded, because he's a pretty major part of the film. The older guy with the mustache, the guy who's like obviously coded as being Jewish.
Yeah. He has a thick accent. Well, he has an accent. It's thick enough.
He has an accent, and I think Lubitsch was Jewish. That's why he left Eastern Europe and
Mhm.
ended up in Hollywood in the 1930s. He was part of that like mass exodus with Fritz Lang and Billy Wilder and all those guys. Um, so Jimmy Stewart reveals to this guy in the stockroom that he's been having this incredible pen pal relationship with this woman who really knocked his socks off with how well she can write letters, because that was, one of the sexiest things you could do in 1920 whatever. And then he meets this young woman who comes into the store. She's trying to ask him for a job for like 10 minutes. He
He
keeps
keeps saying
trying to
no.
sell her stuff. Huh?
He keeps saying no.
Right. And he keeps saying no. Well, at first he's just trying to sell her stuff, and she can't get a word in edgewise, and that's like the closest I think. It's kind of funny because you have like the screwball comedy fast talking thing,
Yeah,
but he
my
shows
favorite.
it as like a side effect of salesmanship. Like, there's a few scenes that are, I think, really brilliantly directed, where you have them like snapping in and out of salesman mode like it was a switch in the back of their head.
Yeah.
And also that the actors do an exceptionally good job with that. And anyway, so she's trying to get a job. The owner had just brought in these cigarette boxes, cigarette holder music boxes that play what I presume was probably like an old corny song in 1940, which means that by now it's forgotten, but it's called Old Chichonia. And every time the person goes for a cigarette and opens the box, they have to hear this music box version of Old Chichonia.
Are we
Uh,
starting from the beginning of the song? It's not like the music box, like you close it and it stops. It's like you open it, boom, from the start.
right. And and he gets in some of the funniest lines of the movie in that sketch. You have almost a precursor to the now like ubiquitous sketch comedy trope of the completely useless consumer object. I think like the guy who's the suck up in the store, he's just like, oh yes, I think people that smoke cigarettes and like Old Chichonia will love this cigarette box.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. And
it's very specific.
yeah, Jimmy Stewart is the only one who will tell him like this is poorly made, and the person's gonna like hate old Chichonia as much as Jimmy Stewart does after a day of using the thing.
Right.
And uh and so we get like we establish his character, I think, very subtly and outside the context of the romance or any kind of romance early in the film. It
Mhm.
establishes the relationship between Matichek, Kralik, and everyone else in the store very early on. Um, it's just an excellently done scene.
Yeah.
But Margaret Sullivan, she comes in and she immediately tries to sell somebody this music box to show that she should get the job. Um, and apparently she does well enough at it that Matichek hires her. Um, and then we see Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan arguing a lot because I think Jimmy Stewart kind of sees her as encroaching on his job a little bit, or like that. At least that's the vibe I get early on because there's not a clear reason why he's so hostile beyond the fact that there already are 6 clerks at this store, and the larger store down the street only has 4.
Okay.
And also, they do mention the depression indirectly a few times, right? Like
Mm.
there's those lines about millions of people are out of work, so he probably feels kind of insecure about his position in the company.
And she's really concerned because she doesn't have a job,
Right.
and it's really hard to find one because of the depression.
Right, and we kind of get the sense that even though Matichek is like not the most warm and gregarious individual, you get the sense that he cares about these people because he is employing them
Right.
in the midst of this and clearly spending a lot of money that a lot of other people in that situation would be holding on to for dear life. And yeah, so they get to know each other. They each talk about talk to other people about this incredible person they've met through the mail.
Each meaning the two, Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan.
Yeah. I mean, like Matichek did not meet anybody through the mail.
Right. Right.
And well, sort of. He found out the true nature of someone through, well, not the mail, but we'll get to that. And so that's set up, and then the movie kind of doesn't pay attention to that for a good 30 minutes or so.
Mhm.
Um, we spend a lot of time with this kind of nagging question of why is Matichek being a dick to Jimmy Stewart when it's clear that they're very close to each other. Jimmy Stewart seems to think like, okay, there's something kind of weird about how our relationship is souring. Uh, Matichek and Jimmy Stewart get into a fight. Matichek kind of very sadly gives him a letter of recommendation and says you're fired basically.
Mhm.
And
This is.
uh
I just want to. I know I'm kind of
oh, there's
divided, but I
probably
believe strongly.
details I missed.
No, no, I know, no. I just want to say that this is the B story. This is part of the B story. The ace,
Right.
the pen pal writing, because they both have pen pals. It turns out, right?
Mm.
Both Jimmy Stewart has a pen pal, and Margaret Sullivan has a pen pal.
And you can guess where that's going.
Right. That's
Uh,
the A story.
that's the A story. Uh, and I think like part of the Lubitsch touch is that it doesn't feel like an A story and a B story when you're actually watching the movie. Like when you're describing it, one of the things sounds much more memorable than the other, but he gives both of them almost equal screen time.
Right.
Everything kind of flows into everything else very naturally. So anyway, so Jimmy Stewart gets fired. Uh, he's kind of walking around sad, and then the store's shut down. Matichek closes the store before he was planning on doing it one night. We get the sense something serious is up, and a private detective comes to him and says that his wife has been having an affair with one of the clerks in the store. It turns out it's the guy who's always like the kind of yes man gossip guy in the store. I forget what his name is in the movie, but
The
uh,
suck up.
yeah, the suck up guy, basically. Matichek is, he's not happy about this, and we've gotten some picture of at least how Matichek views their marriage from the very beginning of the movie, when Jimmy Stewart is talking about having dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Matichek, and they eat this ridiculous 7-course meal.
Right.
And we get the sense that Matichek is a man who enjoys eating food
Yes.
several times throughout this movie, to the point that it gives Jimmy Stewart indigestion, which is when we first meet Jimmy Stewart, he needs a bicarbonate of soda. I don't know why I put air quotes around that. That was a real thing. But so Matichek is, you know, obviously very disappointed about this. He walks into his office. The delivery boy who works for the store uh, has not left the store for the night. Finally, he comes back, and uh, we have possibly my favorite scene of the entire film. Um, there's this incredible tonal shift that Lubitsch pulls off, like with such a light, graceful touch. You have this very funny scene of the young, kind of ambitious delivery boy. He's on the phone. He's pretending to be one of the female clerks. He's doing this hilarious, high pitched voice and carrying on a whole conversation. And then he walks to the back room and sees that Matichek is about to shoot himself. Uh,
And we don't see
and
that. We don't see that.
we don't see that. Yeah, but we see everything we need to know about that. And the two things, there's such a huge tonal contrast. None of it feels forced or artificial, which I thought was like, that might be the single most graceful like tonal shift I've ever seen in a movie.
Because we don't see it, but we hear the
Hmm.
clerk telling Matichek, like stopping him.
Oh yeah, he just runs into the back office. He's like, "No, Mr. Matichek, no!" And then next thing we know, Mr. Matichek is in the hospital, and while he's in the hospital, I think I can't remember if it happens before or after that scene. I just when I was watching it this time, that scene stood out to me as being like very noteworthy. Uh, Jimmy Stewart figures out who the pen pal is.
Yeah, Dan, you really focused on this. You left out a bunch. You left out the carnation. You left out
Well,
the.
the carnation, I can't remember if it happens before or after the scene where he meets with the private eye, because they're supposed to be happening at the same time, right? Because everybody wants to leave the store by 8:30. Margaret Sullivan and Jimmy Stewart particularly want to do it because they're going to finally meet their mysterious pen pal person.
Right.
And so they're supposed to be happening simultaneously. I think that the meeting in the cafe happens first.
Yeah, because like you said, we get the tonal shift. We get the meeting and the whole thing with the Jimmy Stewart recognizing that Margaret Sullivan is the pen pal, her not knowing. That's still sort of part of how can I put it? The earlier tone before
Right.
the tonal shift. I'm pretty certain that happens. We see that first.
Yeah, there's no way. Yeah, it wouldn't make any sense to put that afterwards. That would be like very poor editing.
Yeah.
I guess that's why I didn't make this movie. They didn't hire me.
So wait, so you need to describe that part.
So, okay, so Margaret Sullivan is like, I need to get out of here before 8:30 because I'm about to meet the love of my life. And then Jimmy Stewart is a bit more torn because he has this, long-standing relationship with the store, but he also wants to get out, early enough to meet this mystery woman. He's supposed to have a carnation on his lapel, and she's going to be reading a copy of Anna Karenina using a carnation as a bookmark.
Right.
And he goes over to the cafe with our old man friend whose name I can't remember.
The probably Jewish guy.
Oh, he's totally Jewish. Yeah, there's these like, and that guy has probably the most like, you know what it is? They code him as Jewish by his humor. Like there's a little bit of an accent. There's the mustache. Like he looks kind of, but anyway, I'll get to that part when we get there. So he looks Jimmy Stewart looks in the cafe. He doesn't see the woman. He thinks like, oh, did she stand me up or something? And the older guy looks in the cafe and he says something like, this this woman, might she have some qualities of Margaret Sullivan, who works with us at the store? Would you like it if she was a woman that looked kind of like blah blah blah? And he's like, I don't really get along with that woman. And then the guy breaks it to him. It's like, it is her.
Right.
She's sitting there with a copy of Anna Karenina with a carnation in it. And then Jimmy Stewart can't figure out what to do. So he goes in, he sits down. She can't believe that he's actually the pen pal. And she like treats him, they get into an argument.
No,
They
she has no indication that it's him. She doesn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And she's just waiting for this guy to show up, and then Jimmy Stewart shows up, and they just go at it like cats and dogs. Like I forget the exact lines, but it would be an unpleasant first date if they knew it was a first date, but they thankfully do not know it as a first, or at least she doesn't know it's their first date.
Right. There's the empty seat for her date, and Jimmy Stewart asks if he could sit there, and she's like, "No, my guy is coming." So then he sits at the table next to her at the chair, and sitting at the chair with his back to her, and they squabble somewhat.
And so he's kind of reconciling for a lot of the rest of the movie what to do about the fact that he doesn't really like this person in person, but he's in love with her letter writing abilities. And then she's just sort of hopelessly drawn into this elusive mystery man. There's some great lines in there dealing with the value of fantasy versus having fantasies realized, that I think Slavoj Žižek talks about a bit in Pervert's Guide to Cinema. So then what happens? So we have the scene that I put before that scene mistakenly. Everybody goes to the hospital. Everybody's really worried about Mr. Matichek. Mr. Matichek and Kralik, aka Jimmy Stewart, reconcile, and Mr. Matichek makes Kralik the manager of the store, unfiring him.
And the reason that he fired him is he thought that Kralik was the one having an affair with.
Right, and it turns out it was the suck-up guy. Yeah.
Right.
And then Kralik manages the store, and they're getting ready for Christmas. Big Christmas Eve. Mr. Matichek is in the hospital. We don't see any of the gory details, but it's kind of implied that at least some kind of injury happened with the gun. Like, we do hear the gun go off.
Right.
So they're just getting ready for it. Kralik has a fight with the suck-up guy who was sleeping with Mrs. Matichek, and he gets fired. Pepe, the now clerk, because he got stepped up from delivery boy because, he saved Mr. Matichek, doesn't explicitly say that the guy was having an affair with Mrs. Matichek, but he says it more explicitly than if he just came out and said, like, yo, this dude was banging Mrs. Matichek, he makes his point very clear.
Yeah.
And there's a fight between the suck-up guy and Jimmy Stewart. They have the best Christmas Eve sales that they probably ever had.
Because Matichek is in the hospital, the best gift that they could give him for Christmas is to have the best, is to sell as much as they can.
Right, leave an empty store. And also we have a scene where Margaret Sullivan is talking to Jimmy Stewart and saying that she wants to buy this mystery man one of these old Chichonia cigarette boxes. And he's like, are you sure he doesn't want a wallet? And, his wingman, the older Jewish guy, in probably my second favorite scene of the movie, convinces Margaret Sullivan not to buy the old Chichonia box.
Convinces her to buy a wallet.
Convinces her to buy a wallet by saying that, this cigarette box, it's expensive, but it's worth it to him to ruin his wife's brother's Christmas.
Yeah.
Which is like the best way that I've ever seen somebody be coded as Jewish in a movie. And it's just such a perfectly observed detail. And anyway, so she gets the wallet, and then they have this great Christmas Eve. Mr. Monticek leaves the hospital, shows up. There's a new delivery boy who we meet very briefly. The store closes. The only two people left in the store are Kralik and Margaret Sullivan, who I should remember her name, but
Yeah, I don't remember either.
I'm really bad at fictional character names in movies.
I didn't even remember Kralik.
Yeah, they say Kralik quite a few times, but I don't
Yeah.
think they say her name that many times. But anyway, so Jimmy Stewart, because he's kind of a dick in this movie,
Oh
like
yeah.
in a charming way, but he's like totally a dick. He tells her that, oh, in the letter, she says that the guy's going to propose to her. And Jimmy Stewart says, like, oh, I am sure you will be engaged by the end of the weekend because,
Yeah.
he knows some stuff that Margaret Sullivan doesn't. And he tells her that, oh, your betrothed came in yesterday to check with me about a present or something, and implies that he's fat, doesn't have a job, and wants to live off of her salary. And she's just like heartbroken. And then eventually he lets the joke up and quotes part of.
You left something out. You left
Oh,
the necklace.
oh, the necklace, yeah. So he buys her this gorgeous necklace, and of course she doesn't know it's for her. So he's like, "Oh, can I put this on you just to see how it's going to look on a girl?" And she's like, "Okay." And she admits that she had kind of a crush on him when she came into the store, and that she was basically playing hard to get because she read about playing hard to get in a book about the Comédie Française, which is a nice little touch. And then Jimmy Stewart, and it's hilarious, like seeing him do this whole song and dance about, I wouldn't say he's unattractive, I would say he's quite attractive for his type,
Hmm.
and like all this stuff. And then he finally quotes part of the letter. She realizes, like, oh wait, shit, this guy who I've been arguing with forever is in fact my pen pal sweetheart.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna turn the light on because I look so creepy in the Zoom call right now.
Oh yeah, it totally looks creepy.
It's
Everything is dark except I could see a tiny bit of your glasses, one of your glasses, and a little bit of the window in the back.
all right. And we're back. Yeah. So, and then they realize that they're meant to be together. They get engaged, or it's implied they get engaged. Like most movies of this period, they don't drag it out after the people get together. Pretty much like we have a short scene, and I think this is actually before the scene I'm talking about, where Mr. Monticek kind of takes the new delivery boy, and he's like, "Hey, do you have anyone to spend Christmas with?" And he's like, "No." And then he's like, "Do you like eating large quantities of goose liver?" And he's like, "Oh boy, do I ever!" And they like go off, and it's a very sweet moment.
Yeah, yeah. This scene happens right beforehand. It's the penultimate scene, what you were
Yeah,
describing before, because he's standing outside of the store, and keep in mind now that he is now estranged from his wife, who was cheating on him, and it's Christmas Eve, and so as each person walks outside of the store, he tries to invite them to come with him to go to dinner, or then he asks, "So you must have like a nice party," and the one guy says, "Oh, it'll just be me and my wife and my two kids and all that." So okay, and he goes off, and then another person, and so on. Everybody goes, and except for Margaret Sullivan and Jimmy Stewart, who are still in the back of the who haven't left the store yet. And then finally, the delivery person comes out, and then what you described.
Rudy, I think his name is. Yeah,
What is his name?
Rudy.
Rudy,
And
and it
and,
turns
and
out
I think, yeah, and that kind of underscores how much, like, the Mr. Monticek plot line, we don't get as many direct details, but it's almost hard to call it a B plot because it mirrors and kind of deepens the Jimmy Stewart Margaret Sullivan stuff so much, because
that,
so much of it is almost like mirrored
yeah,
in a weird way, or not a weird way, I guess, like in a classic way. This is setting up how people would make romantic comedy films for the next 80 years or so.
and I just to be clear, so and then we have the scene in which Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan are in the back of the store, and she says about that she's when she comes in Monday, she expects that she'll be engaged, and Jimmy Stewart asks her to try on the what do you call it, to try on the necklace and all that, and then he admits that he's the one. And when you say they get engaged, it's not a separate scene. It's now at that moment, because of that, we know that they're engaged. They kiss. The end.
It's such a long scene with so much dialogue, and it's just done so. There's like so many subtle, small camera movements and lighting changes in that last scene that are kind of perfect. It's just really brilliantly done in a way that's not like Lubitsch is not drawing attention to himself at any point in this film, which makes it that much more impressive. I think that he manages to pull off as much as he does. And so they figure it out, and she's like, psychologically, I'm confused. Oh, and there's a lot of stuff where like Lubitsch he had probably a healthy skepticism towards psychology for the time. Like there's a funny scene where Pepe, the original delivery boy, is in the hospital and he's talking with the doctor, and the doctor's like, I think that Mr. Monachek is suffering from, and he uses like 15 words in like Mad Lib style that you would hear in discourses about Freudian psychology around that point. Or a psychoanalysis is the technical term, but and then the stock boy is just like, is that more expensive than just feeling down or something like that? And and at the end, Margaret Sullivan says, psychologically, I'm confused, but physically, I feel fine. And then they kiss, and then it just says the end, basically.
There's a scene that we skipped over. When he doesn't show up, when Jimmy Stewart, when her boyfriend doesn't show up, she ends up calling into the store sick, and then Jimmy Stewart even goes and visits. She's lying in bed, and it turns out she's sick. She's depressed, and she just can't bring herself to go into the store. She doesn't want to leave her bed. And then a letter shows up, and it explains that he saw, I forget, she was so beautiful.
Well, he saw her sitting with another man, and he didn't want to be that guy.
Oh, right. That other man being Jimmy Stewart himself. Right. So he writes it as if he's someone else. And so now she feels better, and she said, I'm going to come into the store tomorrow. So we actually see this, it deals a little bit with, it's sadness, but sadness to the point of depression, that it affects you physically, although it's situation based. So both of them, they're instigated by something. So Matacek trying to kill himself, and then the possibility that he'll be in the hospital for a long time, is his depression is a direct response to his wife cheating on him. And with Margaret Sullivan, her brief depressive episode is instigated by being let down by the guy not showing up, and how she feels about herself. And then as soon as the situation is resolved in some way, they're able to get up and they're physically fine.
Right. And and I guess that is one of the recurring themes of the film is that one's physical health is more tied to one's feelings and relations to the people around them than perhaps we'd like to think most of the time.
So that's interesting. I hadn't caught that line at the end, what you're saying about feeling psychologically confused, but feeling...
I laughed so hard at that. She has like the perfect pause. I think I sent it to you on chat. I was like, yeah, psychologically, ... I'm confused. And I just burst out laughing at that.
But it's interesting that Lubitsch has them say that, because... it might be in the original play that it was based on. So, but whatever, is that here there is a distinction drawn between the two, whereas earlier what we saw was that they were closely tied together. The psychological issue was tied to the physical sense, and here suddenly, hey, you know what? Psychologically, I'm not feeling quite right. I don't know what to make of this, but physically, I'm fine. So the psychological and the physical are now separated.
Yeah, that's an entry. I hadn't quite taken the thought that far. I was just sort of cataloging like references to psychology in the movie in the back of my head, because references to psychology at that point in time in the movies are usually pretty interesting because psychology, as we know it, was still sort of in a very transitional period. So you have, I think it's handled. I mean, granted, it's handled better in pretty much every movie ever made than it is in the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie Carefree, where Fred Astaire is Ginger Rogers' analyst, and the movie ends with Fred Astaire slapping Ginger Rogers, and then she falls in love with him
Right.
because that's the apparent end of psychoanalytic treatment. That's a movie I'd like to talk about at some point because that's like the dark hidden history of the U.S. cinema in like one movie. But
Sure. I don't know if I don't know if you realize you've actually mentioned that movie several times in different
oh
contexts.
yeah, that movie it just stuck with me so much because every other Fred Astaire movie is just so he's not a psychologist basically. I
Yeah.
guess for a psychologist he's a very good tap dancer. And uh, yeah, and so we have this movie that is very definitely itself. Like there aren't a lot of other movies like this, even like in terms of other Lubitsch movies, this one stands out as being like particularly just very gracefully structured, done, and kind of sweet. Uh, but as I'm watching it now, I've not seen this in probably 8 or 10 years since the first time I saw it. Uh, at its heart, it's a cross between North by Northwest and Clerks.
I don't know what that means yet. I know you'll explain it, but hold on. I
Okay.
just need to absorb that. I think that's really funny,
Okay.
combining those two movies.
So yeah, so North by Northwest and Clerks. So I know you've seen Clerks. We've talked about Clerks quite a few times on this program.
Hmm.
You've seen North by Northwest, correct?
Yep, I just saw it
Okay.
a few months ago, actually.
So, North by Northwest, like a lot of films that have a romantic component, including this one, romance is structured narratively as the kind of two identities chasing each other around, the person's actual self and the fictional self created by romance, or in the case of North by Northwest, by the fact that both people are spies.
Okay.
And I would argue that's really what North by Northwest is about. North by Northwest is about basically the fact that we can only come to romance by fictionalizing one another, and they're sort of chasing each other. You know, they feel betrayed by the fact that they lied to each other by the end, close to the end of the movie, and then they realize that that's just sort of, you know, love is always is a leap of faith, and it can lead to these sometimes comedic, sometimes suspenseful triangulations of identities. And you know that pops up again and again. That's Larry David kind of does that in the season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where they have the Seinfeld reunion, and he's convinced that Jason Alexander is sleeping with his wife because Jason Alexander is the fictionalized Larry David, aka George Costanza, and he's like chasing his own tail basically.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, because it's Larry David, the way that ends is with Cheryl David realizing, wait, no, this is the real Larry David, and I don't want to be married to him. You know, he just goes off about, do you respect wood, which he puts a coffee cup on their table. And then he doesn't even need to show them breaking up. It's just sort of implied in the end credits. Anyway, but so North by Northwest, I think, is the ultimate film about sort of mistaken identity, and I think that's something that Hitchcock comes back to quite a few times in his work. This just sort of fake false identities as a metaphor for the fluidity of identity and for the fact that there isn't really a there's not a true self, right? The self is a thing in motion. And then Clerks, because Clerks is another weirdly nostalgic film about retail. Um,
At least on the surface.
at least on the surface. And I think Clerks, Clerks doesn't realize that it's documenting the end of an era. Shop Around the Corner realizes, although it doesn't really underline it a whole lot, the parts that Lubitsch is probably most personally affected by are the parts with Mr. Matichek, with the old Jewish man, with this sort of memory of Eastern Europe before the war and kind of what normal life looked like in the 1920s. And I think that's why the emotional moments in the film seem so heartfelt and are so affecting.
And the movie was made in 1942, so it's right in the middle of the war.
Yeah, yeah, and he knew, this was his youth. His youth was spent in and around places like this. Mr. Matichek is sort of this memory of nice, vaguely ethnic shopkeepers he probably knew as a kid. Lubitsch himself was Jewish, and so yeah. And there's not like, and I think it's almost more affecting for the fact that he doesn't frame it in terms of the thing being lost tragically, because it was already gone by that point. He knew it was gone, and he's just sort of remembering it fondly, which makes it that much more sad and affecting when you
Hmm.
read it on that level. This was not my original observation. This was an observation by the late great film critic Dennis Grunis on his blog, um, which is still up. You should go check it out. There's short, great takes on probably a few thousand films on there. He
Wow.
was probably the greatest living film critic in the United States until about 5 years ago when he died of diabetes.
Wait, you left out Pauline Kael. That's not fair.
Is Pauline Kael still alive?
Um, I don't think so. Let me check.
Yeah, because I would have said, like, I think he's better than Jonathan Rosenbaum. I mean, Rosenbaum is very good. I think Grunis was doing this stuff on like a whole other level, which is weird because he did not work for a university. He did not have he was pretty much just living on like social security benefits, writing these endless short film reviews. But he points out that because he put Shop Around the Corner in his top 100 films of all time list, and the thing that he focuses on is the fact that it's Lubitsch saying goodbye to the Eastern Germany of his, or of the, not Eastern Germany, the Eastern Europe and Germany, because that's where, like, the movie is set in Hungary, but Lubitsch was from Germany originally. And that's the thing that he points out specifically, and that always stuck with me about this movie. And I think I can't remember if it was like a year before or after this, but Lubitsch made one of the best World War II comedies right around this period called To Be or Not to Be.
That's actually that might be the only Lubitsch movie that I've seen up until we saw this, and we saw another one earlier. I don't know, half a year ago, I forget what. But I think To Be or Not to Be was the only one of his films that I'd seen beforehand.
Oh, do you see Heaven Can Wait?
Um,
That's another great one. Although, I mean, there's a lot of great. Ninotchka is another great one.
oh wait, Heaven Can Wait. Is that Don Amici?
I think so. The original Lubitsch did the original one, not the one with Warren Beatty.
Right, right, right. If
And
it's
it's
with
like
Don
one of the
Amici,
only Lubitsch
I'll
movies
check.
that's in color.
Yeah, if it's with Don Amici, I have seen that one. I did see that one some years ago. I'll check.
And the German stuff, the early stuff, there's a few of those that I love, but I would not say that they're on the same level of like craftsmanship as the later stuff. But like The Smiling Lieutenant with Maurice Chevalier, great movie. Design for Living with Gary Cooper, that's another funny one. And even some of his like German films, there's a great one called Die Poop or The Puppet that's silent, that's very funny.
Okay.
Um,
So just checking.
mm,
Yeah, the Heaven Can Wait, 1943 with Don
mhm.
Amici. So I saw that one years ago, and part of the reason I saw it is because of the Mel Brooks remake, which I've seen a number of times. So I said, let me go see the original. To
Mm.
be or not to
Mel
be,
Brooks did that?
the remake. Yeah, Mel Brooks and the is it Jack
Are
Lemmon?
you Are you sure that was? Because I'm pretty sure the remake was Warren Beatty and
No, no, the remake.
Elaine May wrote the screenplay.
No. The remake of To Be or Not to Be.
Oh, yeah. The remake of To Be or Not to Be, right?
Yeah, so I saw To Be or Not to Be, the original 1942 version, because of having seen the Mel Brooks version multiple times. And by the way, To Be or Not to Be and The Shop Around the Corner came out in the same year. They both came out in 1942.
Oh wow, okay. He was busy.
To Be or Not to Be came out March 6th, 1942, and The Shop Around the Corner came out. Oh no, The Shop Around the Corner came out in 1940.
Hmm.
Oh, interesting. Before
Well, that would make sense because yeah, because it's right before the war. But like, it would be hard for if he left Germany to make it in the United States without. I mean, I imagine his English was probably fairly good if he was able to work directing movies in the United States, but he knew what was going on. You know, you don't just leave the country. And like he was a fairly successful director in Germany too, so he would have been leaving a lot behind to come to the United States. He knew what was going on. He knew that this if he returned to Europe, it was not going to be the Europe that he left.
Right, right.
And it's like a lot of the kind of golden age of Hollywood. A lot of the behind the camera talents were a result of us just getting a lot of people that fled Germany before the war.
Uh-huh.
Huge number of people. You know, I mean, Billy Wilder. And actually, I wrote a piece that was published in a documentary film textbook about Lenny Riefenstahl's Olympia. And you know, when you kind of you look at what these people were able to do in the United States, you see how much more of an act of moral cowardice and just like unforgivable opportunism it was that Riefenstahl stayed in Germany and chose to work for Hitler.
Uh-huh.
Um, Apologism essays aside, like honestly, a lot of the Lenny Riefenstahl apologetics writing is just kind of disgusting to me personally, but
Oh yeah, totally.
it's like
Yeah, the way the rehabilitation of Lenny Riefenstahl in the 70s, and by all these famous people. Yeah, it's she's like,
yeah,
well, she
like
wasn't really a Nazi. She was like just doing this to make films and and she wasn't, not really part of the machine. It's like, no, okay, fine, you were an opportunist. You
right.
took advantage of the Nazis' rise to power in order for your own rise to power within the film industry.
And it shows in her films, you know, like in Olympia, you're just looking at it's almost pornographic. Like she's looking at bodies entirely for their power and finesse. Like we don't even see the things as sporting events. We're just basically watching this 3 hour long Gatorade commercial. And she's just obsessed with perfection of the body, which or you know quote unquote perfection of the quote unquote aesthetic perfection of the body. She is very much a Nazi filmmaker. Her
Yeah.
values and ideals aligned with the Nazis, and the reason why she couldn't make I mean, there were a lot of reasons why she couldn't make movies after that. I think she managed to make one movie about like deep sea diving or something, but uh, yeah, the people who had the deeper moral content in their films in the Weimar Germany film boom, because there was a lot of there was a huge movie boom going on in Germany right before the war happened. They were getting a lot of movies that were getting attention abroad, and that's why a lot of these guys were able to get work when they landed in the United States
Uh-huh.
because they were known entities. Because you know, I mean, otherwise, I can imagine it being kind of like you ever called a cab and you start talking to the guy and he's like, back in Iran, I had a degree in nuclear physics, and now here I'm driving a cab.
Yep. I know.
Um,
I know in its own way it's a trope, but it's real. And yeah, I've been in that situation.
and thankfully, we let these people keep making movies in that particular instance.
Uh-huh. Wait, hey, Dan, talk about tonal shift. We somehow ended up on Leni Riefenstahl and Nazi filmmaking, as we were, for this movie, that just wonderfully sweet movie.
Hmm.
It's a rom-com. It's a rom-com in
Hmm.
part, right? Or at least the overlying thing is a rom-com, and that's sort of the main part of it.
Yeah, it's
You
like
come right up
it
with the
doesn't
drama.
insist on any of the elements. I think that's what's so great about it is like you could call it a Christmas movie and it hits all the boxes you want. It hits everything you want from a Christmas movie. It hits everything you want from a romantic comedy, and it doesn't give you too much of any of it. It's not like it's like a Snickers bar, right? Like there's just enough sugar, there's just enough nuts, there's just enough caramel, any more and it would be excessive.
Don't forget the chocolate.
And the chocolate, yeah, the chocolate is um
The first thing you see.
right. And
Yeah.
but I'm kind of curious because this is the first time you've ever seen this, right?
Yeah, I've never seen this before. I think I'd heard the name, but I think the first time that I heard about it really mentioned with any, I don't know what the right way to say it, not gravity or importance. Oh, maybe even importance, but just
Mm.
you've mentioned it a number of times to me before, and even just in preparation, saying, "Oh, maybe we should
Mm.
do this."
Well, we were
Talk about.
originally we were gonna have that guest on, and then I don't know what happened with that. I haven't heard from that person like months, but
Oh, okay.
uh,
And we were going to have this as a double feature with You've Got Mail, which is strictly speaking, I was reading up on this. It's strictly speaking not a remake. You've Got Mail is not strictly speaking a remake of The Shop Around the Corner. They're both based on a 1937 Hungarian play, but
mm,
in You've Got Mail, the one story is called The Shop Around the Corner.
right.
So it's a reference to it. But I forget. Oh, but I think that's the most that I'd heard of it was from you mentioning it multiple times. And it's like, oh, I want
Mm.
to see this. I want to see this. But no, I've never seen it. And oh, it was so wonderful. And watching it, I was in love with the movie from 5 minutes into it. And then when it shifted and it was no longer the same kind of comedy, I was like, wait, now I'm watching a different movie. What happened? And then I got into it, and it's like, oh my God, this is such a sweet movie. Oh, and even with Jimmy Stewart being kind of a jerk, and Margaret Sullivan being really being mean to him. He
Mm.
was nasty to her. She was mean to him, but they were both good people. Um, and and I'm just waiting there for the will they won't they. And of course we know it's going to end with a will they won't they. Yes, they will. But how it's the journey. I'm going to sound trite. It's the journey. But
And I think in terms of rom coms and even You've Got Mail, one trope that Lubitsch does not engage in this film that I think allows it to be so sweet is like in most other romantic comedies, one or the other person is engaged to somebody who's like more boring than like a box of like crackers or something. Yeah, just like unbelievably boring. Going back to the first rom com, it happened one night. Claudette Colbert has the fiance, and she eventually realizes like, oh my god, I would rather take out my ear with an ice cream scoop than have to listen to this guy tell me about his day for the rest of my life. and and that happens in a lot of movies, right? Like in the thing you pointed out to me, because you started watching You've Got Mail, I never got around to it before we had to start, we decided to start recording, is that both people are in relationships at the beginning of the film,
Mhm.
and you can't the films seem to think that we need some person of contrast just in case the lead actor or actress is not appealing enough where we would think that someone would ever fall in love with them without a dire alternative, like
Right.
a gun pointed to their head. And Lubitsch in this movie, he kind of neither of them are perfect. Neither of them are particularly idealized.
No.
We see nice parts about both of them, and the closest thing we have to this sort of like contrast character is this fictional person they think they're talking to in the letters, who turns out to be the same person all along. And so you almost have the trope, but it's collapsed into one person in terms of like Jimmy Stewart. being this guy in the letters and being Kralik at the store to Margaret Sullivan. And so she thinks she
And vice
has
versa.
this like much better fiance. And it also kind of reverses it in a weird way, because unlike in It Happened One Night or, His Girl Friday, or like any number of movies, the fiance is seen as being the much more attractive option.
The fiance on paper.
The fiance on paper, yeah, the fantasy. Um, Whereas like You've Got Mail is kind of a fantasy about, it's a fantasy pitched at middle-aged people who are probably like miserable with their marriages, dreaming about any kind of escape.
They're not middle-aged yet.
Oh, okay, but well, I would guess the target audience for You've Got Mail was probably middle aged. The same way, like anything about a high school is usually pitched to kids that are 2 to 3 years younger than high schoolers, and the same way that most romantic comedies featuring people in their 30s are actually pitched to people in their 50s. I
Okay.
would argue, but I'm not a movie executive,
So
unless somebody wants to pay me that's listening to this. Like, I'll gladly take your money.
there's somewhere in between what doesn't work. At some point, so you've got the movies with people in their 30s pitched to people in their 50s, and there's the movies with people in their teens that are pitched to tweens or younger. But then it gets closer and closer, and then there's this big space in the middle. It's like nothing's being pitched to those people, and yeah, they're busy having
Oh,
kids.
there's plenty of stuff being pitched to those people, but it's pitched as being their own age. Like I think the film industry largely thinks that the only time anyone actually wants to be the age they are is roughly between the years of maybe 23 and 35.
When
If that.
they're having kids, they're getting married and having kids, and they can't afford to go to the movies.
Right. Well, but that's the most prized demographic is for advertising, right? Is because those are the people that still haven't made their major big dollar purchases yet.
True.
So you want them to think they want to buy your car, or your home insurance, or this or that.
Yeah. But boy, Dan, I started watching You've Got Mail, and I got I stopped 6 minutes and 37 seconds into it. And it starts off, you've got these two people, Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. They're both in these relationships that looks like they're positive relationships. We only see briefly Greg Kinnear with Meg Ryan and Parker Posey with Tom Hanks, and they both seem very happy and comfortable. But we also see the first things we're really getting are their email-based love affair. We get to
emotional infidelity.
What was that? Yeah, and it starts off with infidelity. It's over email. But it is very clear infidelity just over email. They haven't met in person yet. I don't care how the rest of the movie goes, because I remember I saw You've Got Mail years ago, and I didn't care about the movie. I just saw it, and I thought it was, I don't remember. I just didn't care for it. But as we watched not You've Got Mail, as we watched The Shop Around the Corner, I just insulted The Shop Around the Corner. As we watched The Shop Around the Corner, I was retroactively liking You've Got Mail more. And so now I wanted to see the remake and say, oh, how did it capture that sort of feeling and all that? And then I see the beginning of it and I'm like, no, I can't handle this movie. Part of it, personally, it hit a little too close to home. But just why? It's already.
Yeah, I mean, you're going home to Parker Posey, like she's not exactly chopped liver.
No, both both for Parker Posey and Greg Kinnear. I'd want to be in relationships with both of them. Hell, both of them at the same time. But
Hey, Parker Posey, Greg Kinnear, if you're listening, I've been to Ron's apartment, and it can definitely fit at least 3 people if you're willing to get a little
cozy.
snuggly.
Yeah, we can be cozy with 3 of us. And it's not like, I could choose right now I want to be with Parker Posey, and then right now I want to be with Greg Kinnear, and then right now I want to be with both. So.
Right, but Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, they do have that option, and they
eschew it.
They eschew it. I think like the way you're describing it to me, though, I can see where it's the ultimate boomer midlife crisis rom-com, right? Because like a lot of boomer mentality at least as I have experienced it as a like not quite ex-millennial, but on the older side of millennial, is this they're consumed with fantasies that even though they have things very good, it could be slightly better. Like I remember a lot of movies that my mother used to watch when I was a kid around the time that You Got Mail came out, and she saw that movie like 15, 20 times probably. um, it's always like, oh, I have a nice life, I have a good marriage or whatever, I have a good kid. What happens if I completely blow all that shit up in some kind of act of self indulgence? And in these movies, it ends well for them,
Uh-huh.
which obviously I have never seen. I have never seen somebody like leave a relationship through an affair and it ended well in any way. Like the affair, usually affairs are not. It's not about finding quote unquote true love. It's about some kind of defect in the primary relationship or some unmet need, healthy or not, in one of the partners. So it's kind of a dangerous fantasy, and it's kind of
Wait,
weird that
I gotta stop you there. Maybe it's a dangerous fantasy in a lot of cases. I have seen it work out well.
you have seen it work out well.
I have
Okay,
seen it work out well.
I mean, granted, I don't know a whole lot of the people my age that I know. They haven't gone through the first wave of divorces just yet. I still got another 3 4 years on that, but and it's kind of interesting that You've Got Mail starts out with two people in an affair. So we're basically rooting for Mrs. Modicek in You've Got Mail.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, you're right.
Or at
Man.
least we're supposed to root for the suck up at the store. And if I mean, granted, I saw a lot of this movie when I was younger, but Tom Hanks, right? He's running basically Amazon.com or
Right.
some equivalent. She's running a small bookstore, and he's kind of like even the supposedly happy ending is basically her store goes out of business, and she just starts sleeping with the enemy and gives up on her hopes and dreams because she's going to be steamrolled by technological progress in the form of Tom Hanks' penis.
And just using Amazon.com for today, at the time it would have been Barnes and Noble.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that was when the big Borders, Barnes and Noble, that was like the hot new thing that you could go into a bookstore and just buy coffee or whatever, right? And they were huge.
Right. And now it's Amazon.com because it's bricks and mortar, or brick and mortar, whatever. Now it's Amazon.com versus any local store.
Right.
It's a bookstore.
Right. If you remade You've Got Mail now, like you'd have an extensive sequence at the beginning of like Tom Hanks watching Meg Ryan getting dressed through her doorbell. Um,
We talked about this. I just got rid of Alexa. I just
mm,
yanked all of my Echo Dots. I had three of them. I was using
right.
them as speakers, but also as
Oh, they
Alexa.
sold?
They sold
Awesome.
this morning.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had three. Not exact. I didn't exactly spend a lot of money on these. I got the Echo Dot third generation. I got them on sale, two of them on sale, so I didn't spend a lot of money on these. But I decided to get rid of having a spy in my house, or at least somebody that was somebody named Alexa who was spying on me constantly. If I'm going to have somebody spy on me, somebody online spying on me, I want to open up my laptop and explicitly go there. So I'm going to go to Google and go to Amazon at the moment that I want the spying to happen. I don't want the spying to happen 24/7.
Right. If you want somebody looking at all the time, you want it to be Parker Posey and or Greg Kinnear.
And the key being the slash there. It's and slash or, not just or. But anyways.
Oh.
Yeah.
But yeah, You've Got Mail is such a fucking boomer movie now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, why do you say boomer specifically? Is it the generation that we know as baby boomers? And again, this is drawing, it's broad brushstrokes when we say boomer and millennial and Gen X and all that. But that said, is it boomer specifically, or is it the age group?
It's boomer specifically, I would say, not the age group necessarily. I think because like a lot of the reason why you see all that anger in Gen X movies towards boomers, I mean, like the whole punk rock movement, to a large extent was like there's just a lot of anger directed at boomers because there was this sense that the idealism of the 60s, the late 60s protest movements and whatnot turned into this kind of self-serving yuppie culture and this acceptance of uh, basically wages being scaled back and everything because they got theirs. Like, boomers had it very easy economically speaking compared to, say, millennials or even Generation X. And they, as soon as they got the classic case is Jerry Rubin being part of the Youth International Party, right? He's like Abby Hoffman's right hand man. And then in the 80s, he just starts hawking diet pills and working on Wall Street.
Uh-huh.
Just 180-degree shift. And so you've got Mail, you have this kind of like, you have the values of my personal happiness is the most important thing in life. There's not a sense of community. And in fact, the sense of romance comes out of the fact that they're betraying the expectations of community in the form of their partners and children.
Right.
Um, you have this acceptance of like this kind of bland acceptance of the bigger things coming along, may as well make do with it, right? That's led to all these problems now because nobody was fighting for any of the labor movements for like 20 or 30 years, or at least the people with the economic clout to do so were all busy being Jerry Rubin. And this idea that that's somehow romantic and that can all end very well for anyone involved without any serious consequences.
And I'm just thinking now of Gordon Gekko. Greed is good. In this case, the greed being, I'm going to find a partner who's even better than the really good partner that I have right now.
Right, and even David Mamet, who ended up becoming a major like neoconservative. I don't know if you've read anything that
Right?
David Mamet's written in the last like 20 years, but he's like to the right of George W. Bush at this point,
No.
ever so slightly to the. Yeah, he was one of the guys when Trump got elected, writing basically like "you guys are all whining because you're a bunch of pussies" articles.
No.
He basically became Gordon Gekko, but even he sees like there's something vicious and awful in that culture, even though he decided to embrace it. Whereas Nora Ephron in You've Got Mail and writing it, not just embraces it, but papers it over
Yeah.
with
Right.
fantasy.
We're rooting for them from the start, and they're the romantic leads that we care for, that we think are wonderful,
Mm.
and that we're connecting with. There's, I don't know if later on in the movie, I don't know how it deals with the partners discovering that Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks are cheating on them, even though it's over
I don't remember there being any kind of like shocking moment of revelation in any of those movies, or I mean, in any of in that movie from watching it
Yeah.
as a kid. Like, I don't, I feel like they sort of were just sort of like, oh, you found love, good for you. Um,
Yeah, that's the sense I get of where it's headed
right, like
after 6 minutes and 37 seconds.
their partners are part of the boomer conspiracy
Yeah.
to embrace like selfishness in the form of sentimentality.
What would the Gen X version of You've Got Mail be, and what would the millennial version of You've Got Mail be?
Millennial version of You've Got Mail would probably be um it it would be so hard to, because like the nostalgia that, because like the bookstore in You've Got Mail, not the big Barnes and Noble bookstore, but there's an element of nostalgia in there, right? It's like this kind of harkens back to my childhood, and it goes back to the thing of like, I'm not making money at this place. This place is not something I see as my livelihood. It's something I see as a sentimental way to indulge uh my personal fantasies of what I want to do with my life. And I am in as Meg Ryan, I'm speaking as Meg Ryan's character here. I am in a financial position where I can live out my sentimental fantasies. Uh, Millennials, I think most of the nostalgia is placed in their childhoods because of the fact that the 2000s and 2010s were such a giant shit show.
Uh-huh.
So it would be hard to, like, the less serious side of me is imagining two people having a conversation about this man sends me the most sensitive artistic dick pics on Tinder.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you can't make a movie out of that. That wouldn't. I can't imagine.
Well, you just don't see the dick pics, or you see the shock on the face or the ooh
Right.
you don't have to show the actual. It doesn't have to be the X version. The dick
Right. I
pic.
feel like millennials don't have a lot of sentiment or romantic notions tied to the idea of corresponding via prose or text.
It'll all be
Um,
about swiping left and right, Netflix and chill. You'll be like, yeah, but there is a I deserve better
there
thing.
is an I deserve better, but it's coming from a much, like, they wouldn't be cheating on their partners. They'd be like alone in their apartment, depressed, playing video games or something all day. And it's like, I deserve better. You'd have much more depressing circumstances that they'd be starting out from.
Uh-huh.
Although, on the other hand, you have like this job market issue. You could have it be like Shop Around the Corner, where they're just happy to have jobs. They're
Right.
not the best paying or like most ambitious jobs in the universe, but they're both kind of struggling, but not but in a relatively fortunate position relative to how shitty everything outside is. Generation X.
Oh no, wait. I'm going to answer the
Oh,
Generation X
okay, yeah.
before you do. The Generation X one is going to be, this is as good as it gets.
Right, which was also a movie that was not what about anything
Yes.
you're talking about, but
Yeah. Or
um
it'll be called Reality Bites.
right.
No. It'll be called Clerks.
Right, Reality Bites totally has that rom-com setup of like Ethan Hawke's a complete asshole, but he's considered to be Ben Stiller is too much like a boomer, so she's just reacting knee jerk reacting like, oh, this guy's boring because he has a job and he's like not a dick to me about the one philosophy class he took in college.
Right. Right.
Um,
I'm gonna go for the asshole Ethan Hawke because at least he's a musician, right? He's a musician, and but he treats her like he's such a dick. That's part of the reason I
oh
don't.
yeah, he's such a dick in that movie,
And
and now
actually,
that I'm thinking about like in terms of Gen X rom coms that did actually come out and had Gen X themes, the one that seems to resonate the most with millennials from speaking to them, I wouldn't personally say it's one of my favorite films, but Before Sunrise, I have heard so much about Before Sunrise, um, and I guess maybe that kind of the theme of happiness being fleeting and temporary might be resonant.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
We're gonna get it for the moment, and then we're gonna wake up.
right, like happy
That's
nihilism in short doses.
we're only going to have something good for a short while, and then it's not just that we're going to wake up from the dream. It's that, like, no, this happened briefly. That's even worse. It wasn't a dream, it was real. And then this, and then the sun rises, and we don't even get to go to sleep because we have to go to work.
Right, and even that, like they finally get together, and the whole movie about them getting together is about how they're miserable and can't stand each other.
Yeah, so yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, there we go. Okay, good call.
Yeah, because I just remember with my ex, like we had so many, like her and her friends were so into that movie. It was sort of like the way that some millennials got really into Friends, because Friends is sort of the escapist fantasy about not living in the 2010s.
Uh-huh.
For a lot of people, like, kind of aspirational, like I'm in a city and my friends are the functional family that I never had, blah blah blah, like all the reasons I don't really like Friends very much.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, like I did not understand it, because my favorite Richard Linklater movies are like the really weird kind of disjointed ones, like Slacker, Dazed and Confused, Waking Life, that kind of stuff. Like Scanner Darkly, I like Scanner Darkly quite a lot, but
As much as I know I've said this before, and I had very early on Anno Mini which I really want to disown and or redo. In which for years I've I've claimed that if you want to understand Gen X, you just have to watch Slacker, Clerks, and Heathers. If you watch those
Hmm.
three movies, you understand Gen X. I actually don't like Slacker that much. I'm not a big fan of Richard Linklater, honestly.
Yeah, I think Linklater is. He seems like a really nice guy. Like everything I've read about him as a person, it's like he just seems like a very supportive, upright kind of dude.
Uh-huh.
So this is not, I'm not trying to personally attack Richard Linklater, but his early work, the stuff that I like, is basically Robert Altman without the humor. The later stuff that, in Before Sunrise, I don't really care about Ethan Hawke as an actor. I don't think he's a particularly good actor. I can't think of a movie that Ethan Hawke was in where I was like, Ethan Hawke is the highlight of this movie.
No, I don't like the characters he plays.
Um,
Apparently, he's a decent guy.
yeah, he seems like a nice enough dude, like, and again, like, it's not, this is not personal stuff. This is me being a movie snob, but uh,
I know, you
the
know what? I know he's helping with running a campaign to save the Coolidge, Corner Theater in Brookline, the independent.
yeah, like it seems like he's doing good stuff with himself. I just don't find him as an actor, the roles. I guess Linklater for me is like, on paper, Slacker is my favorite one of those movies because it is this borderline anthropological portrait of, um like, I've spent quite a bit of time in Austin, Texas. That is probably the most accurate
Hmm.
metaphysical picture of Austin, Texas that anyone has ever taken. At the same time, I wouldn't even say that that's my favorite Texas movie, though. The movie that I think captures a lot more of what I've experienced of Texas is probably The Whole Shootin' Match by Eagle Pennell, which, granted, Richard Linklater had a large part in getting restored and re released finally.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, the Before Sunrise thing, I don't get the appeal. And the weird thing is that you're asking me this question about, like, what would You've Got Mail for Millennials be? And I think, like, the two out of the three long-term relationships I've had in my life up to this point, letter writing was an enormous component to it, because you meet the people in person, but you're really getting to know them over the internet.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, I still can't imagine a movie. I don't have this sentimental attachment to it. It's just sort of a reality of living in the time period I happen to be living in.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Wait,
but
Dan, I've got to say something funny about
yeah.
about the generational differences. I don't know if you remember a quiz that we took, and stop me if you don't want me to reveal.
Oh, no, it was a.
It was some one of those online quizzes things, but
Mm.
somebody was sending around, and so I took it, and somebody I know, another person I know who were almost the same age. I think she's just a couple years younger than me. So I'm Gen X, and
Mm.
she's Gen X too. But we took the quiz, and we both came out as, what do they call it? Uh, Genlennials, or I don't know.
Xlennials.
What was that? Xlennial?
Xlennials is the one I always hear.
Okay, Xlennials. So we both came out as having one foot in Gen X and one foot in as millennials. And apparently you took it and you were a baby boomer.
Right, which is
And you're what, 15 years younger than me? Wait, let's see. I could do the math.
I'm
You're
31
18
right
years younger
now.
than me. What was that? You're 18 years younger than me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
our age difference can buy cigarettes.
Right.
Um, which is funny because, like, in my head, I feel like the culture that had the largest impact on me as a kid, probably because my older sister was very firmly Gen X, and she was the person that was handing me stuff to watch and read and whatnot. And we had a conversation about this at your birthday when you were, like, very drunk once, and
Oh, so I probably don't remember it.
possibly, yeah, we were at the karaoke bar. That place is great, but or was great. may rest in,
Oh yeah, that's actually how when Alex ended up on the podcast, he texted me one day and he said, "So, when are we doing the podcast?" And it's like, "Oh, that's great. You want to do it?" It's like, "Yeah, we had a long conversation about it at your birthday." So my memory is already bad enough. But then
right.
it
But no,
had,
so like the whole everything from like button down shirts with square stripe patterns, which I seem to wear. That's like 90% of my wardrobe. But
uh-huh,
specifically, kind of this feeling of uh, kind of like resigned nihilism that I see in a lot of Gen X culture, with sort of like the culture has produced all this garbage. We're going to use it as a playground thing. Had a huge influence on me
uh-huh.
as a younger person. Like the whole like Beck, just let's take everything and every record I have in my apartment and throw it together and see what comes out kind of thing, or let's just interview crazy people on the street and see what comes out, and who cares if it's any good. That's probably what I like about Slacker. um
Wait, so that's the Gen X part of you. And actually, by the way, speaking button-down shirts with stripes going down, that was that was half my wardrobe in college. But wait, that's the Gen X part. What's the baby boomer part?
baby boomer part, I mean, the baby boomer part was probably the fact that my dad was, we had a very large house in the 1990s because he was doing very well for himself, and he loved going around to yard sales, but he doesn't collect anything in particular, so he would just see something, think it looked cool, and pick up, like he would come in with like a crate of records he got for $5 or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And after he bought the thing, he just likes collecting he just likes accumulating the stuff. I'd be around the house. We had this very nice sound system with a turntable, and I was listening to all of these 60s records that he was picking up at these yard sales. I was watching, I guess I didn't take in a lot of like 60s visual culture. um I'm not sure what in the test came across as baby boomer, because I don't feel like my personal values align with at least what the baby boomers became. At the same time,
No,
the late 60s counterculture did have a huge impact on me. Like if you go in my apartment, I have the Warhol banana prominently displayed. I have Robert Crumb's Zap Zero prominently displayed.
which is the boomer generation.
Right, although Crumb was the person who kind of hated the other boomers, right? Like that's Fritz the Cat is basically him shitting on everybody that was his age that he was living around in San Francisco. That's a movie I would love to cover on here, Fritz the Cat. That's like a great movie.
That was one of the things in college. I don't know how or why I knew about Fritz the Cat. Um, but when I first started college, and I was blown away. I was mesmerized at how many film clubs there were and how many movies you could see on
Mm,
in any given week at several independent cinemas. Because if you wanted to go to the multiplex, you had to have a car pretty much.
mm,
Um, but several independent cinemas, and then across the university, because I went to a
mm,
Big Ten school, and there's lots and lots of lecture halls and small classrooms and all that. And there were a number of film clubs that had different foci, uh,
mm.
and so you could watch any number of movies in any week or even on any given day and have your choice. I don't remember how I knew about Fritz the Cat, but I got a number of people in my hall to go see Fritz the Cat, and I was so proud that I got them all to go see an X-rated cartoon.
Mm.
And there were two things around that. One, that I managed that I got to go these things, and sort of with a mischievous smile on the side of my mouth, that I managed to get all these people to go. The second thing was, that's how they now, the most salient thing that they knew about me was that I took them all to go see an X-rated cartoon. And it's not a porno, but it's an X-rated cartoon.
Yeah, no, I mean it's pretty, it's bawdy, but it's like it has some of the least sexy sex scenes in the cinema.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Like it's I know that Robert Crumb hated the movie when it came out. Um, I don't. I mean, Robert Crumb just likes hating things, and that's part of why we all love him. But uh, I feel like it got the spirit of the comics like pretty dead on. Like, there's no illusions about what free love and hippie culture were in that movie. It's basically just like free love is this way to trick impressionable women into granting sexual favors. Fritz the Cat is this like deadbeat trust fund kid that goes to NYU or whatever. Um, yeah, it's just one of the least sentimental films about the 1960s that was ever made, I
Yeah.
think. And actually, I think to go back to the Gen X boomer thing, I think part of the reason why everybody was so angry at the boomers is because there was this incredible outpouring of great pop culture. Like, they were there at the right time to kind of personalize mass media in ways that had not really been done beforehand.
Mhm.
You have, most of the great rock records are from, 1963 or so to maybe 1975. Most of, I mean, I think movies in the 60s, there's a lot of great independent stuff that wasn't necessarily seen very much. I don't think commercial cinema that period was particularly good. In a lot of the hippie quote unquote movies, I don't like. We've gone into my hatred of Easy Rider before, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, you have all this. You have this huge peak. You have this. Everybody's like saying like, why the fuck are we running the culture like this? They're going out and protesting. They're getting on the news for doing it. They're going out against the war, and a lot of the hatred later on is, I think it's a feeling of betrayal, a feeling that we were sold a false bill of goods by these people who turned out to be hypocrites.
Right.
And in the face of that, like, I think that's where a lot of the Gen X nihilism comes from, is basically, I don't think the boomers realize that by putting up this huge front in their youth and then turning out to be mediocre in their later years, there was this disillusionment that set in where you couldn't really talk about having ideals or wanting something better for the culture without sounding like one of these boomer snake oil salesmen. And so I think that still kind of puts me like culturally, at least as I understand it, in the Gen X category of like the parts of boomer culture that I appreciated are pretty much all tinged with this sense of they all sold out, or like a large portion of them sold out.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And the stuff that holds up from that period largely was the counter culture, right? Like Lou Reed didn't give a shit about the hippies. Robert Crumb hated everybody. Even like the Rolling Stones, like a lot of that stuff is, they're not taking it seriously. Like his Satanic Majesty's Request, out of all the Sergeant Pepper knockoff records, is probably the most acidic and satirical. Like, you have this ridiculous, stupid looking picture of Mick Jagger in a wizard hat on the cover. They're not structuring the songs at all. It's pretty much just like, hey, somebody's going to pay us to do drugs and make a record. We don't even have to pretend that we're not on drugs this record.
I just thought of a model that of boomer, Gen X, millennial, and I don't know enough to extend it to zillennial or Generation Z. Well, I'll put a pin in that because there's something I want to say. And it's a little self-serving because it makes Gen X sound a little bit, not come out like a rose, but
Hey, I mean, Gen X has every right to defend it. Gen X got kind of a raw deal.
Yeah, we're the forgotten generation. We got, we're smaller and we're like, yeah, whatever, you're not as important. Yeah, and there is part of this whole, the big, at least online, it seems a little less so, but boomers versus millennials, and they're both fighting and having this war. And with Gen X, we're like, yeah, just keep us out of this. You got, well, why can't you all just get along? I don't know, but just keep us out of this. And actually, I remember seeing a post on, somebody on Facebook that I know who's millennial, and making some comment about how Gen Xers are starting to sound like boomers. I'm like, fuck you, you fucking millennial. And normally I don't have that. Normally I'm like, part of it is like, just keep us out of this, keep us out of the fray. And part of it is like, this whole idea and these gross generalizations and all that. But anyways, what I wanted to say was, and I actually think about both, it's like boomers, you're saying all this stuff, but also, part of it is, they've gone through, they're older and they've gone through all this stuff. And, that's part of, there's a certain progression that happens. But part of it is too, is, that millennials, they don't get a fair shake because they're told, oh, they're entitled. So like, it's not that they're entitled, it's that they think like, we want better. We deserve better, but and we're going to work to get to that point. It's not just give us stuff for free. But I think boomers are like we have more, and we like it that way. And millennials are we don't have anything. We deserve more, and like we want stuff too. It's not it's not just like we need a job that pays us well. It's like we like to have things. And so there's this materialistic strain, except that they can't, they weren't able to afford the materialism stuff. And I think, and that's, they're older. As they get older, they're making more money and they're buying more stuff. And I think that now I'm getting what I deserve. I worked for it, and now I'm going to buy stuff. And with Gen X, it was always like, yeah, we're doing okay. It's not going to get much better than that. And, and it's still like, okay, we've got better than that, but it's like, we're still not, and this is as good as it gets. So like, we're going to work hard to keep like, to get stuff, but we don't want stuff in the same way that the boomers and the millennials do. So that's my self-serving thing. Not that we don't get stuff.
I think that's like a pretty,
what was that?
My friend Stan, who is very much Gen X, I think he's maybe a year or two older than you are. The guy that I've been running the Writers Without Money website with for a long time. When we were first talking about this, I kind of pointed out that I admired a lot of this Gen X like embrace of junk thrift shop culture kind of stuff, and now that I'm older, I think I can articulate this a bit better. But the shared use between millennials and Gen X people of irony as violence against the tropes and givens of the culture. I think that's the large thread between Gen X and the millennials. And I mentioned this to him, and he brings up Reality Bites. He brings up these like Gen X movies, and he says all of this was Hollywood selling kids on downward mobility because they were never going to get what the boomers got, because wages have stagnated since like 1972.
Right.
And they're basically saying like, oh, it's cool that you're never going to be able to afford anything, which I thought was really interesting. And I think the millennials kind of, it got, none of that stuff has gotten better in the last, 20, 30 years. So it reached a point where it was uncomfortable enough. I think also like the price of going to college went up so dramatically in the last 30 years or so that like instead of kind of leaving school and just getting a job that maybe doesn't pay as much as one would like, you're leaving school in like mountains and mountains of debt that you're never going to be able to get out of. So it feels like a more desperate situation. I think the humor of millennials is a lot more angry than Gen X humor. Like if you look at internet memes, maybe not from right now, because I think Gen Z is sort of taking that over, but from like 10 years ago, or like what I remember when I was a teenager looking at on the internet, a lot of it was just straight up shock material. Like we thought that stuff was hilarious. Like, oh god, like I'm trying to think. There's a comic by Johnny Ryan called The Comic Book Holocaust, where he's just like doing these incredibly obscene parodies of popular comics, and he does like a version of Mouse where Art Spiegelman's dad has numbers tattooed on his dick, and we thought that was hilarious.
Wow.
Back then, or like I remember, oh god, I had friends send me this like comic that's now actually banned on the internet internationally because it's considered hate speech, but we didn't really see it as hate speech, called Electric Retard, where it's literally just what is the most offensive image that we can possibly come up with, or like the newgrounds.com, all those flash animations, right? Like the one that sticks out in my head was somebody just posted a thing saying, what's the most disgusting image you can think of? And the person says, Pennywise the clown from the movie It and the Burger King fucking and having a baby. And within 2 weeks, there was a flash animation called The Miracle of Pennywise the clown and the Burger King fucking and having a baby.
Nice.
And all of that, in retrospect, seems very much like there's a sense of disappointment underlying it, as I believe there is in most angry cultural products, but it's I don't get that sense of like extreme directionless anger from Gen X stuff. There's sort of just a detachment in a kind of sense that if I become emotionally involved with society, I will be disappointed. Whereas the stuff I was looking at as a teenager, and that most of, I'm sure this is very different for women versus men in that period, I think, too. Um, so much of it was just sort of like angry, violent nihilism, essentially. It's like, in retrospect, it's not that surprising that the like Pepe the Frog extreme right wing of millennials did eventually come to fruition out of like 4chan message boards.
Yeah. There's so much of that saying, look how progressive millennials are, and fuck you, baby boomers, because it's like, well, actually, there isn't every generation has its mixture of people across the spectrum, and there are people who get more, become more liberal as they get older, not more conservative, and so yeah. But even yeah, plenty of millennials who are hardcore pricks.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of millennial anger, and some of it did turn towards productive causes, but I think a lot of that, I think a lot of the credit for that should go to Gen Z, because Gen Z are sort of, we were like, climate change really came into the massive, like the forefront of the national discussion probably right around when I was getting to college. And we were still sort of looking at it as an abstraction. Like we didn't figure out quite how fucked we were until we were out of college. The Gen Z kids see these problems as being tangible and immediate, I think, in a way that millennials are going to be the last generation to kind of think of them as being something that can be mentally abstracted and rant.
When actually, when I was in college, to talk about climate change, back when we called it global warming, or was it Karl Rove? No, not Karl Rove. Who came up with the term climate change to make it sound much more neutral?
I forget.
But yeah, it was there was this strong, will they, won't they? It was like, is global warming a real thing, or it's this hypothesis, but is it really there, or is it not? And not sort of in the current discussion, where there isn't this this balance, this the two sidems that exists is false. Climate change is real. Climate change is very much real. We're seeing it. And so any of the like, well, it's not clear, blah blah blah, fuck you, it is real. Whereas when I was in college and it was being discussed, it really was like, well, we've got some evidence to support this, but we've also got that, and it's still, a lot of the science around
and that was how it was. Like, I remember when An Inconvenient Truth came out, most of the discussion was about whether or not Al Gore was incredibly boring to listen to.
Yeah.
Right? And there wasn't this sense of, and I mean, when the reality of it kind of hit me, I think halfway through college, it was, and it's a lot to take in emotionally, the idea of the end of the world, right? In these tangible, real terms.
Right.
And I just didn't get the sense, like even half the people my age, if I talk to them now when we've seen the or like capitalism. There were clear signs that capitalism and U.S. foreign policy were not headed in a sustainable direction when I was a teenager or in college. And when I have discussions with people my age about this stuff, maybe, half of them are just sort of like, yeah, we're completely fucked on this. And the other half will send me these long lists of other predictions about the end of the world
Oh yeah, yeah.
and say like, every one of these was wrong. And it's not really, it's a fake. It's, if you accept the scientific method and methods of science, then this is a real threat. And that's kind of, I sent you that comic I drew in a notebook
Uh-huh.
the other day with the two stick figures, and they're kind of talking, and the one guy says, I fucked your mother, and the other guy says, your society is going to sink into the ocean in 12 years.
Wait, that
That
wasn't the end of it though.
Huh?
That wasn't the end of it. That was, you just reached the middle. No?
Oh, wait, right. So it's very much a millennial comic in the sense that I was talking about from when I was a teenager.
Okay.
I can't repeat parts of it, I think, on the podcast because it's pretty offensive. But
Wait, I want to find just that one, but that one page, those 4 panels. Let's see if I can find. I'm searching.
what is it? The one guy says like, you're a derogatory slur for homosexuals. The other guy says your society is going to sink into the ocean in 12 years. Then the other guy says, I fucked your mother. And then it just says laugh track at the bottom.
That's it. Okay, I knew there was something in the middle there. Yeah, or another piece. So yeah.
And that's definitely, that's the most millennial thing I think I ever produced.
That's comedy gold, by the way. I think that's comedy gold. I actually laughed out loud. I LOL'd. I actually laughed out loud. It was hilarious. I really LOL'd, not LOL that you put in a text message saying, meaning, oh, that's kind of amusing. I really thought that was, that was
thank
really
you.
funny. So hence my response that it was comedy gold, not LOL.
Danger zone, going to the danger zone.
So I just had to step away for a moment, and I put myself on mute. But Dan, you were not on mute, so I could hear you singing briefly.
Oh, I was leaving that as an Easter egg for when you were editing.
Okay, yeah. So should I keep that in there as I'm removing stuff, or no? All right.
Well, I don't know. It's your discretion as the editor.
Okay. Oh, all right. There we go.
That's your power in the chain of command.
Right. Sometimes when I edit, I tell you what I've edited out, and sometimes I don't tell you everything that I've edited out or kept in that maybe should have edited out. But I'm sorry, you were starting to say something when I had to step away.
Oh, I was using filler words because I was trying to figure out what to say next because I felt like I needed to say something. I think I mean, I guess with like Generation X, it'd be interesting to hear because I was not alive for a lot of this, or I was in diapers, and you were kind of going into it a little bit with the global warming discussion. How were people talking about boomers in the early '90s, late '80s?
I don't remember. I don't recall it being as. I don't recall there being that same level of animosity that there is when the stuff comes out between boomers and millennials. But I suspect that part of it is, I'm going to say, is social media. I'm going to step aside for a moment. And I don't think that social media is a bad thing per se. I don't think that Twitter is inherently a bad thing. Facebook is a bad thing. Now I'll step back. I think there's a lot of amplification, and there's a lot of people are able to voice what they have to voice their opinions and their thoughts in ways in spaces that they weren't able to before, right? So everybody has a platform, and so the animosity and this acerbicism, I don't know, this acerbic
tone.
This acerbic tone is people have a way of saying this publicly and for a much larger audience, and so it comes off as much stronger. And the people who don't feel as strongly aren't saying anything, right? It's the people
Hmm.
who feel the most strongly. So the complainer, the the people that feels the most strongly are the ones that complain. The people are like, no, you know, okay, I don't like that, but it's not that big a deal. So like, or you know, it's not worth it. Are the ones that aren't going to complain out loud. And the people that like something, that love something, are going to say, I love this and this, and they're going to say it loud. And the people, they like it, they're not going to say it with the same emphasis. So it's not
Hmm.
going to come out. So they all now have this platform that anyone that wants to listen to them can can hear it.
You've got mail.
Yeah. Well, but look, you've got mail. That's going to an individual, right?
And
Because
you've got mail in a certain way. It is this document of, and I was working on, I mean, I guess I still have notes on it. I might compile it as a book. I was working on like a version or sort of a response to the Walter Benjamin Arcades project for a while, because I realized that I'm part of the last generation that believed there was some possible utopian outcome to the internet.
wait,
Um,
before you go any further, you were writing something in a response to what, and what is that thing?
Oh, okay. So the Arcades project is this enormous fake. Well, it's not fake. It's sort of a it's an aesthetic encyclopedia that was being produced by Walter Benjamin, who is one of the major critics of the what was called cultural criticism. That's because they didn't care about making the name of the movement Googleable, but but like Theodore Adorno would be one of the other major writers of that movement. Adorno had a lot more success in his lifetime than Benjamin did. But basically, Benjamin was a collector, kind of like me, of weird or obscure objects. There's a lot of accounts of people that went to his apartment, and he just had piles of like kind of ephemeral advertising documents, things like that. And so he makes this book that's essentially a work of criticism, but it's arranged in short entries alphabetically on these parts of pre-war European culture that he found interesting. The definitions of these terms are really pieces of criticism. There's a lot of just like short quotations from documents that are completely ephemeral. And he never finished the book, but it is published. It's an enormous book. It's probably my favorite bathroom reader, besides the Harvard reunion book. Which the Harvard reunion book, there's like so much amazing stuff in that. But
Talked about that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and and so I was kind of struck by this because just because there's endless fascinating bits there, and you get this sense of a bygone culture more tangibly than possibly in any other book that I've ever read.
Mm.
um, and so I thought to myself, it's kind of important that, like, even though these things were betrayed and shown to be wishful thinking, that people do remember the utopian aspects of how people viewed the potentials of the internet and mass communication networks, even though, like, from the time I was reading a lot of Neil Postman when I was a teenager. And like, if I don't know if you ever read any Neil Postman, he's a sort of like a more intelligible Marshall McLuhan who was a self-proclaimed Luddite. He basically says that there's going to be massive negative consequences of the move from being a culture based on text to a culture based on short images. He's the guy who wrote "Amusing Ourselves to Death," the book with the cover is like Ronald Reagan with a clown nose. and uh, and so I was aware of this stuff. I got into a lot of arguments with internet utopians who were fellow teenagers at that point. And but there was this sense of, when humanity had all of the documents and the receipts available to them, they were going to pick the better road, and we would end up with a better society as a result. Obviously, this has not happened and is probably never going to happen. In fact, a lot of the opposite happened in a way that very much resembles what Postman was writing about. and I think, like, to go back to your social media comment, I'd almost disagree with that
Okay.
insofar as from this postman informed perspective. I the biggest argument that Postman makes in his books, or the most important one to me, and I think the one that gets quoted the most, is at the beginning of Amusing Ourselves to Death. He makes an argument that, like in communications theory, one of the major arguments is there an inherent bias to different forms of communication? Uh, the people who say no would be the people who say, like, it's it's not something inherent to how we communicate over the internet. It's what we've done as people.
So that's what I said.
Yeah. And so the perspective that Postman, or the argument that Postman makes, is there's an inherent bias to communications. And the example he uses is, imagine you're stuck on an island and the only way you have to communicate is smoke signals. Nobody's going to be able to write great works of philosophy with smoke signals. There's just not enough bandwidth, right? Um, and I think that the internet, because of how it is structured, tends to encourage these short, emotionally reactive communications. It encourages kind of superficial emotional responses to things in a way that you can't really get from long form prose. Long form prose, it's very hard to make that, like, hit an emotional fever point, just because it's sort of spread out over more space, right? And the other thing that he mentions in those books is that the primary psychological crisis of the internet age is going to be people having people responding to the feeling of being emotionally overwhelmed by being offered too much information. He thinks that access to information is not inherently better, and that it's sort of the extent to which you meaningfully engage with the information goes down the more of it that you're handed in a random, chaotic fashion, which I think would describe the internet fairly well. And in retrospect, it seems like social media and short form communication would inherently favor people looking for things that agree with the viewpoints they already have, so they don't feel completely powerless and adrift in the universe, which I think is a lot of right wing reactionary philosophy right now. Comes down to people who are afraid of becoming meaningless due to technology, becoming kind of obsolete because they can't keep up with these things that are considered to be essential parts of everyday life. Like, it's got to be pretty alarming if you're, say, 60 years old and suddenly every few years you have to learn how to use a different technological tool in order to speak to your children or something, right, like that. And a lot of them are getting very angry about that. Um, and yeah, I kind of feel like Twitter. On the one hand, I think Twitter is managed a lot better than Facebook is. On the other hand, I think that boiling everything down to very short communications inherently creates problems that you don't have in a more manageable media environment.
Like,
Well, emotional reaction.
no. Like what sort of media?
Oh, so, like,
You just gave me a media form. You just said, the Twitter and Facebook
right. So
versus.
before you have the internet, you have centralized dissemination of information
Okay.
through television, through magazines, through, if we're going back to the 19th century, most communications are being done through long form prose and magazines.
Okay.
And there are things that are wrong, where there are problems inherent to that form of media dissemination as well. A lot of Postman's work, he's going into basically the advantages of long form prose communication, while also explaining that he's not endorsing a lot of the horrors of the 19th century. Um, it's not, he's not saying that was a utopia. He's basically saying that you have this problem from a shift to visual or short form communication. Um, it's kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie thing, right? Like the just because something is different than what it's replacing does not mean that it's not susceptible to the same problems or worse problems than the thing it replaced.
Okay, here's how I'm seeing it. All right. Smoke signals, say something very simple. You're not, you're, or, there's only so much you can say in that little bit. And then you get on to long form and you get into a lot of stuff and then the subtlety and you get the different arguments and all that. You get your 5-paragraph thesis essay. You have to come up with the alternative hypothesis and then argue against it and et cetera, et cetera. I realize, I'm joking about the 5-paragraph thesis essay, but that's what we're taught in school. And now what we've got Twitter and Facebook, and basically you've got the same thing as smoke signals, but you also say fuck you.
Right. And like I spend probably way too much time on Reddit, and I've noticed over the course of the 10 years or so I've been using Reddit, it used to be that the most popular subreddits and posts were people writing these long form stories, sometimes made up, about their lives, or like Ask Reddit threads where people leave very long. And the Ask Reddit subreddit is still fairly popular, but I've seen a rise in basically subreddits that entirely revolve around emotionally triggering content, just one thing after another. So like r/fuck you Karen, r/Noah get the boat, r/ I am a total piece of shit. Or these are all actual subreddits that mostly consist of pictures or videos of, like, one that went viral yesterday was some guy in a Mexican cartel pushed over some lady in the street because she complained about him not having his dogs on a leash. This was on r/I am a total piece of shit. The entire comment thread is just people saying, like, basically, wow, this guy's a complete piece of shit. Fuck humanity. Everything sucks. Blah, blah. And on the one hand, yes, that guy is a complete piece of shit. On the other hand, if it says something, if millions of people are specifically seeking out tunnels of nothing but content about how shitty people are and reacting to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a bit of kind of a counter movement of that, which I don't know if it's any better. There's like r/wholesome memes, basically the complete opposite, just like an endless set of like 2 sentences and a picture of just like, this guy lost his house. The community pitched in and paid for a new house. Okay. And it's just like a picture of the guy. You have no idea if this is a true story. It doesn't need to be a true story because it's 2 sentences and a picture. It's almost like if you boiled down comics, right, to a certain extent, like memes. Which is funny because comics were considered to be this incredibly oversimplified medium, and now the most popular currency of mass communication, which I would say memes are more prevalent than television, etc., even though they're not discussed in a serious way outside of Matt's ISIS cats articles. There's a really good piece on the like political significance of Karen memes in the Guardian 2 or 3 days ago. And like, what is the bias of communicating endless stories in incredibly simple forms meant to specifically elicit an emotional response? And you think like it's almost like drugs, right? Because these people, it's not like any of this is hidden. You go to these subreddits to get a certain amount of whatever chemical your brain creates when you see cute kittens or somebody being a total piece of shit. And and I think there's even a self-awareness. Like, you see a lot of comments of somebody will see something really disturbing in one of these posts and they'll be like, I need to go look at some cute kitten memes now. Like they need a like taking a Pepto-Bismol after you ate too much pizza or something, right? Uh, and I think that engenders a sense of unreality. Like when you can kind of control your emotional response to events because there's so much, or not your emotional response to events, but your general emotional highs and lows by consuming these short bursts of nearly contextless media.
Okay.
There's something to that that seems like it's not going to end well, or already has reached a point of not being the greatest way that we could potentially run a society.
All right, I've got now, I said that it's boiled back down to just, or the smoke signals, but with
Mm.
fuck you at the end. So like it's you don't even get the smoke signal. You've got three things. You've got fuck you, life is great, and thoughts and prayers.
Right, right. And you have
That's
people
it.
kind of trading themselves to do that with cinema and films, like, or television programs like You've Got Mail. When my mother watched that 15 or 20 times, she was using that in a manner similar to how people use drugs.
Mhm.
She was very depressed, watching a lot of television, and she was using that to regulate moods because she couldn't do that with the non-intake aspects of her life in that moment. And right, that seems like kind of, and I think that definitely adds to a sense of, like, when you're talking to people on the right or even on the left to a certain extent now, and I think this is part of what people are getting at with this, with the use of terms like social justice warrior or whataboutism or whatnot. When you see the particulars of your own reality being this malleable, like I said before, there's a sense of unreality that sets in. There's a sense of facts themselves are relative. Um,
Uh-huh.
you're not seeing these things in a context where they, or in a larger context where they exist as having actions, reactions, or elements that suggest that there is a universe that is larger than the person's uh, day-to-day intake of images or experiences.
Suddenly think you're talking about You've Got Mail. And I'm being somewhat reductionist and all that, but
No, no, no. I mean, it's because
no, no,
I
I'm
have no
being,
idea if this makes any sense when I'm talking about it. Because, like, so a lot of times when I talk about this stuff, people's eyes kind of glaze over.
no, and I'm yeah, okay. Well, here's what I'm getting out of this, or I'm simplifying it, is that You've Got Mail. I watched 6 minutes and 37 seconds. I didn't even need to watch that much to know exactly where it ends up.
Mhm.
Everything along the way is like, it doesn't matter. It is going to go from, I know where it's at. They're going to, Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks are going to end up together. And it's not going to be a very interesting, ride along the way. The shop around the corner, we know fairly early on from the start, like we know where it's going to end up, but we actually don't quite start with the two main characters meeting each other. We get a little bit beforehand to give us a little context, but once they meet each other, we know, okay, we know where they're going to end up. However, and I go back to using this term, the journey is the reward. We're going to get some very interesting stuff along the way that will, if we just go from the we know where it's going to end up, then who cares about the middle? Then we've missed out on the movie, because actually it's the in between stuff that really matters. It's what happened
Yeah,
along the way.
yeah, and I think to go back to the Greg Kinnear Parker Posey thing, like, there's a sense in a lot of media, left or right wing, that I mean, certainly far more in although even in like pop media, like, hell, this was my problem with Moonlight when I watched it a few years ago. There was this sense of disposable people,
Mm-hmm.
or what you would call in a video game like non-player characters, right? Uh, you have the people at the center of the narrative whose concerns and behavior are shown to matter because they're paid close attention to, and then you have these people surrounding them where their entire existence revolves around emphasizing some part of the protagonist, or getting the protagonist from point A to point B. And I think in terms of like cinema, that's one of the major things that I look for in narrative films, is to what extent does it seem like the director considers some of these people disposable.
Right, right.
And yeah.
So you've heard the aphorism, there are no small roles, only small actors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You've got Mail, and with the disposable characters,
Mm-hmm.
there are small roles, and there are small roles of big actors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Parker Posey and Greg Kinnear, their roles are small. That's the way that they're
Mm-hmm.
structured. You go to Shop Around the Corner, there are roles that don't have, I want to say, all those people that they don't have that many lines, but everyone in the shop, none of those are small roles. These are all important roles. These are all big roles, even if they're more of the background. I want to say the background. They're part of the flavor.
Yeah, they're all given their moment to kind of be filled out. And I think that Lubitsch is such, he's so exceptionally talented at sketching. He has an incredible eye for what details are important.
Right.
Like, we don't spend a lot of time with these people, but we get a pretty good idea of who they are without it seeming like a caricature.
Even the two characters that could be the most caricaturish are the
Suck up, dude.
what was that?
Suck up, dude.
There's Suck Up Dude, and there's the coded Jewish guy.
Right.
No, but they both play very important roles, and in fact, it turns out the Suck Up Dude is who every people are, they exist in contrast to them to some degree, and it turns out he's the one that's been having an affair with the store owner's wife, which obviously leads to the guy trying to commit suicide. And the other character, I can't remember his name, but the coded Jewish guy, the guy with the mustache and the accent, he plays an important role for, like, he's Jimmy Stewart's kind of like, he's the avuncular character. He's like Jimmy Stewart's uncle, and he's the one that actually goes and see Jimmy Stewart is afraid to look into the store, and so he goes and looks into him, and he kind of slowly leads him into it. It's like, well, I do see somebody there. It's like, well, it's like, okay, but then she's like this, and he finally says, well, you know what? It's actually her. So you could say that they don't have they're not small parts. I don't want to say they're small parts. They're supporting. They're all supporting parts, but that's just it. They're supporting.
Yeah, and I think where there are parallels in the film, or where a contrast is being drawn between characters, it's a much deeper, more ambiguous contrast or connection that's being drawn. Like in a poorly done film, you have let's say you have one character, and their whole point is, I am the embodiment of being boring, and I suck. And here is the character we're supposed to like, being put in contrast, and you put them next to each other the same way, like the classic trick where you go to the bar with somebody who's really ugly, so when you're talking to girls, they think you're the pretty one, right? Or guys or whoever, right? And that it's just it's not inexpansive, or it's self-serving at the end of the day, because the characters, ultimately, when you're writing characters, they're always going to be some aspect of yourself, because you can't not put that in there. And yeah, I guess it comes down to like a poorly drawn character that's purely functionary, reveals kind of a lack of self-reflection, self-knowledge, or some kind of, like, because in real life, if you're the kind of person who you don't have to become best buddies with somebody who you get a taxi ride from, but if you treat them as if their only purpose in life is to give you a taxi ride, and they do not exist outside of the taxi, that is not considered an attractive quality in a person.
Right.
Whereas in a movie, that can be seen as almost like a subtle power fantasy. I think like in romantic comedies or like in action movies where you have these endless, or like Star Wars, you have these endless stormtroopers that basically exist as shooting gallery targets
Right.
for the protagonists, and the audience loves that because they're probably emotionally exhausted from thinking I have to deal with the people around me as people, which is one of the uglier sides, I think, of human psychology.
Uh,
But it's very prevalent because that's popular movies love to indulge their audience in these kind of not necessarily wholesome power domination or just I am the center of the universe fantasies.
so we've actually ended up back on You've Got Mail. Not You've Got Mail. Oh my God! Again, I
Well,
did
you
it.
got mail. You got mail as an I am the center of the universe fantasy, right?
Yes, yes. That, at least that's the way it come across from the start. And if I knew that You've Got Mail is actually about Parker Posey and Greg Kinnear, I'd watch it. But it's not. It's the
Hmm.
center of the universe. Tom Hanks, who plays a master of the universe in Bonfire of the Vanities, by the way. um, but in Shop Around the Corner, it is anything but that. So, but yeah. So Shop Around the Corner. What other thoughts about that?
It's a great movie. It holds up, and maybe we'll cover some other Ernst Lubitsch movies later.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that. And we've got now. I've gotten to the point where I've been watching Preston Sturgis, maybe a
So yeah,
little.
you've been on like a huge 30s and 40s comedy kick for a few months now.
Yeah, I just watched the Palm Beach Story.
Hmm.
I just watched the
I
Palm
never
Beach.
saw that one. Any good?
It is good. It is good. Okay, I'm trying to figure out. I just watched that recently with somebody, and I'm trying to remember with whom. Maybe it was with Matt. Except that with Matt, we've been doing Marilyn Monroe. Now we're doing Betty Davis. We were doing a little bit of Cary Grant, but yeah, Preston Sturgis and stuff like that. So, all right. Well, I gotta say, thank you so much for introducing me to this movie and for
Hmm.
mentioning it so many times.
Oh, not a problem. I mean, I love this kind of stuff. This is,
Yeah.
I mean, this might be. I think Lubitsch was definitely the best comedy director of that period. Like, there's a lot of great stuff from that period. So I'm not saying that to talk shit about Preston Sturgis or Howard Hawks or anything, but it's just sort of it's the top of a very tall mountain,
Right, right, right.
shall we
They're all
say.
great. He's phenomenal. They're all great. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, I would love to watch like Ninotchka. I never actually watched that all the way through. Maybe that could
That's
be the
that's
next
what.
little bitch that we do.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that in a little while. I do want to talk about other stuff. You had mentioned some stuff that might be coming up or is hopefully coming up.
Oh man,
It's Your Move. So It's Your Move is a short-lived TV show. It was only half a season from the 1980s
I
with.
think it was a whole season. It ran for 18 episodes. It said so. That would be like a full season order, or like a
uh,
slightly abbreviated full season order.
Abbreviated, yeah. Oh, they stopped production. In fact,
Hmm.
the last few episodes might not even have aired. Um, and
Hmm.
then, but with a teenage Jason Bateman, he was
Hmm.
the star of the show, early teenager. And then we've talked. We're hoping to have John Sanborn on again this time to talk about some of his own projects.
He'll be back.
Yeah, yeah, Sanborn.
It's like there's like a three-way bromance going on here, and I'm just the first one to say it out loud. I think,
Oh, totally, totally. It's so much fun.
but John's just like, yeah, we love John over here.
Right, right. And hopefully, well, so yeah, we'll definitely have John Sanborn on. Hopefully, not too long.
Hmm.
It's more a matter of scheduling. Hopefully, we'll have It's Your Move and with Matt Cornell,
Hmm.
who, well, we can get to details on the episode why. And what else have we talked about lining up, or do we have any specific?
So my friend Ross is going to be coming on at some point in the next month or two to talk about computer hacker movies. He's a computer security expert. We haven't decided the exact movie we want to do. We were talking about war games, but I think there's some other ones that might be even better. But that should be a really interesting discussion. We're going to have on Lisa Padovani, who costumer extraordinaire. She worked on stuff like Boardwalk Empire, The Departed, the HBO series Oz, and that's currently she's or I don't know if currently, but most recently that I'm aware of, she was working on that Gotham TV show,
Mhm.
the like Gotham Without Batman thing. But she just like incredible costume person. I'm not sure what the I'm saying costume person because there's probably a lot of roles she's playing behind the scenes, and in conversations I've had with her, it sounds like there's a lot that goes into getting everybody dressed up so they look period than one might think. And so very excited about that. We're going to have on Kevin. I don't actually know his last name. Kevin from
Kevin X.
Kevin X, owner, proprietor. He makes amazing coffee, drinks, crepes, you name it. And he owns one of the last still operational video rental stores in the entire United States. I am, of course, talking about Video Underground in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. And he's going to come on. We're going to be talking about the Michael Nesmith movie, sketch comedy, what have you thing, elephant parts. What else do we got lined up? I think there's some other stuff we were going to do that I'm forgetting, but
Well, I've got one thing that I want to suggest, and so
yeah,
and
go for
you
it.
can stop me if you want. But without getting into too many details, we ended up getting into a discussion of the history of the graphic novel
Mm-hmm.
and comics in general, but the graphic novel. And you actually did something about superheroes in comics. You posted.
Oh yeah, part 2 of that and part 3 of that are recorded. I just need to do a little bit of editing on those, and those will be up soon. And I think there's going to be a part 4 and 5 because I'm just rereading all that stuff because I moved back in close to my parents, and all this stuff was in my parents' basement. I assembled a research library, not realizing it, and I'm having fun looking at it all again.
All right. But I also have a proposal, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
So there was also separately a discussion of graphic novels and history, of the history of the graphic novels. And you actually, as part of a conversation, you gave an entire outline of a class of if you taught a class.
I gave three outlines for different
Three outlines.
classes. Yeah.
3 outlines, and so I propose, but you're not a professor, so you don't have right now a form.
I don't have crippling debt,
And you don't have crippling debt.
but I do have a lot of comic books.
But I would propose that you have a platform for it. So
Mm-hmm.
you could create the class as a series of short episodes as an Anami sidecar, which we introduced with Neon Genesis Evangelion.
And hopefully we will continue at some point. We've been having some scheduling issues with that, but it'll happen.
Scheduling is always an issue. But so I would propose, Dan, and you don't have to agree or disagree, or you could disagree right now, but you don't have to agree right now and commit to it. But I would propose that you do actually create that as a class, as an Anami sidecar, as a series.
Sure.
All right.
All right. So this has been Dan.
And this has been Ron.
And we'll see you at the movies.
Take care.